bad.
What's up? Another episode of Real Perfect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Varendas, also known as Ricky Varendas, and today we have a great episode for you. A great story author, researcher, science writer, Kris Newby. She has a great book called Bitten, The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons. There's also a documentary she was a part of called Under Our Skin about Lyme disease. I won't tell you too much because she tells a story, and it's just super fascinating. I love these type of podcasts where people have this direct connection to the story they're writing about or sharing. And so it's super fascinating. Hopefully you guys enjoy the show. This is episode 202. It's crazy. I'm in the 200s. It still feels kind of weird. It's 6 years ago to 200 episodes later. And you guys still aren't sick of hearing me talk. Maybe you are. Maybe you come for the guests, which I hope you do because they're always much better spoken and much brighter than I am. But remember, if you want to support the show, our Patreon page, I'll put all this stuff in the show description. Our Patreon page is, will give you behind the scenes information. What I mean by that is I will tell you the second a guest is booked. Once I'm brainstorming a couple guests to maybe have on together, I'll let you know about that. So usually you know about my podcasts when I release them. And if you're a Patreon supporter, it doesn't matter if it's $1 or $5, whatever you can do. I'll tell you when a guest is booked, even if it's months in advance. So just a cool way of kind of getting some behind the scenes information before everybody else does. And I figured it's a great way of getting you guys to support the show. I was thinking of doing Patreon only podcasts, but honestly, the whole point of this show is try to spread these conversations. So I think that would defeat kind of the purpose of this podcast. On that note, spread these conversations. If you can't support us financially, please share these podcasts on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you are, YouTube. Tweet them, share them, upload them, whatever you want to do. It's all open source. I'm just trying to get these conversations out there. I think they're important stories, important conversations, and you never know who's listening and who you might connect with or who might connect with these stories and these topics. So please do that. I am on Instagram, RV36, Twitter, RV36, our YouTube channel, RV36, Facebook page. We do have a facebook.com/The Ripple Effect Podcast page just for that. Or you can find me on Facebook if you want to be my friend. If you are, and if I'm ignoring you by any chance, if you want to be my friend on Facebook and you're a listener of the podcast, just send me a message. Let me know that, hey, I'm a listener of the podcast. I have no problem saying yes. But too many times I'm like, hey, this person, I don't have any mutual friends, but maybe they're just a fan of the podcast or from some different country or different state. And then come to find out it's some spam or, some spammer trying to get me to click on some link or whatnot. So just give me the heads up that, hey, I'm a fan of the podcast, and I'll be more than happy to be your friend on Facebook and follow me on Instagram, Twitter. On Twitter, I share much more articles and stuff like that. On Instagram, you're going to see much more about what I'm eating, wine and whiskey that I'm drinking, maybe some interesting cigars or keto, paleo food or product that I'm enjoying, and a lot of cute pictures of my kids. So if you enjoy all that stuff, then follow me on Instagram and be my friend on Facebook. Twitter is much more about just interesting articles, maybe films, documentaries and stuff like that I share. So I think that's it. Of course, the Theory 6 music is all the stuff you hear on these podcasts. If you like them, then I believe you can still purchase them on iTunes, Google Play, all those places, and all that money goes to helping the podcast. So another great way of supporting the show. A bunch of great shows coming up. Brainstorming, getting some interesting guests together, people together that I think would make for great roundtable discussions. I think you guys really enjoy them. I really enjoy them. So it's awesome. It's one of the few ways you're going to get me to stop ranting and talking if I have really interesting guests on that I love listening to. So you put a bunch of interesting guests together and it shuts me up for a little bit. So I think you guys will enjoy that. That's it for now. So I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Hi.
Hey, Kris, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Well, thanks for being with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to meet you finally.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting book and story because unlike some of the people that interviewed you, I actually have a personal connection to Lyme disease because my mother got it some years ago. And when she got it, it was super scary because we didn't know how serious it was. And we live in Massachusetts in the East Coast where you see Lyme disease the most. And we hear a lot of conversation about it, but it was amazing to me when she got Lyme disease, how little people seem to know about it and all the mystery that surrounded it and how serious it was. And yet there seems, I don't know if there was just a lack of, you would think something that is, I guess borderline epidemic in regards to, in the summer, people are petrified of ticks and going out in the woods and hiking and all this stuff because Lyme disease has become more common throughout the years. You would think there'd be more research or investigation into it. And I know there's been like a vaccine that they promoted in like the late 90s or something like that. But it's wild because when I started looking into your work, I'm like, wow, there's finally somebody who's investigated the backstory and how serious this really is. So I guess to get right into it, how did you, I guess, find intriguement in this story? What's your personal story and connection to Lyme disease?
Well, I agree. I sort of didn't know anything about it till my husband and I and our two boys in middle school went to Martha's Vineyard for a 1-week vacation. And, we had a great time, came back, and a week later in California, my husband and I were sicker than we'd ever been. And that sort of started what is now a 15-year journey to try and understand why is Lyme disease so controversial when it's so serious. And so it started with trying to figure out what was wrong with my husband and I. And then while I was recovering, doing a documentary about it, and then deciding to do a deep dive book that just looks at the origin theories of how this outbreak of freaky tick-borne diseases started.
Yeah. So when you got it, did you guys find ticks on you immediately and just didn't think much of it? Is that what happened initially?
So we were on this little sandbar of an island right off of Martha's Vineyard, and it used to be an old military target practice, and it had gun turrets on it. And so we were just walking around in the grass, and we didn't see any ticks, but that's not unusual because if they're seed ticks, little ticks, they're like as big as poppy seeds. Later, after it took a year and 10 doctors and $60,000 and we got diagnosed, I realized I had this oozing sore at the back of my hairline underneath the hair, and that never healed actually until I had it cut out. And that was where my tick bite is. My husband doesn't know if he was bitten. He never figured out where the bite site was or if it was sexually transmitted, because there have been no human studies on that.
Huh.
But we know we had it, and we had 2 tick-borne diseases: Lyme disease and babesiosis, which is a malaria-like parasite. Lyme disease is a bacterium. It's called a spirochetal kind of bacterium that looks like a corkscrew. So we had many positive tests for those as we recovered. So we know that's what we had.
And What were your symptoms? Were they immediate? Were they? I mean, did you start getting? I mean, did you feel kind of like something was wrong that night? Did it take a couple days, or how long until you kind of felt like something was seriously wrong?
I would say, so we were there a week. I think we were bitten in the middle of that week as we stayed in a hotel in Boston. We both had sort of brain on fire symptoms. I had like, that would be 4 days after the bite. So I had a sort of a rage kind of episode, and my husband had nightmares of a bear eating him.
Really?
So that was a weird symptom. And then a week after we got back from Massachusetts, then we were both sicker than we'd ever been before. I mean, just imagine the worst flu you've ever had. So weak, I had to crawl on my hands and knees up the stairs, and neck headache, headache, sweats, just crushing fatigue, and so that was the first sign. And then as we went through the year of trying to figure out what was wrong, pretty much we would be really bad for about 3 days, and then we'd have a little bit of reprieve, and then it would get worse. And, so it was waxing and waning, horrible symptoms for about 6 months. And then once we'd hit the 6-month mark, we were just so disabled, and every day was worse than the next. And it's sort of hard when you've been a healthy, athletic person your whole life to realize, oh my gosh, I may never get better again. And it's just, at 6 months, it was like both of us, getting sick the same day, had Alzheimer's, chronic fatigue, early onset dementia, or like a pile-on of diseases, and no one believed that we were really sick because we looked okay.
Yeah. Do you think that was some of the issue? Because I know when my mother got sick, I was kind of surprised how quickly they jumped to the conclusion that it was Lyme disease. And do you think that's because of maybe it's the East Coast, it's much more common? You went back to California, the doctors there don't really see it as much. Do you think that was kind of the issue?
That was part of it, because very few doctors I meet around, I mean, I work at Stanford Medical School, actually know much about Babesia at all. They give me a blank stare when I say I had it. So that is part of it. But when I did the documentary, which was about 3.5 years of interviewing patients and experts all across the United States, I would say that was more common. It was more the rule than the exception. The only places on Martha's Vineyard now, you come into the ER and say, I have the flu, and you immediately get a bottle full of Doxy, which is, I think, the right thing to do. If you have a life-threatening disease, like a potentially life-threatening disease, why not be proactive? Just like if I were going to go to Costa Rica or a tour of the Amazon River, my doctor would give me prophylactic doxycycline or anti-malaria drugs, I mean. So why not do that on Martha's Vineyard, where it's just a huge problem? So yeah, part of it is California just doesn't see that much of it, but most of it is this mythology that's been built around Lyme disease, mostly propagated by the Infectious Diseases Society of America, that Lyme disease is rare, easy to treat, and easy to cure. And so that was sort of the subject of my documentary, Under Our Skin, that just shows enough patient testimonials of real people who obviously aren't hypochondriacs saying, this is what the disease is, this is how it felt, and this is how it almost destroyed my family.
Yeah, with my mother, I think she went a month or two before she actually went to go see a doctor. She remembers seeing the tick on her, and she started getting headaches, and her whole body hurt, like her bones, her muscles. Every day it was she didn't really think it had anything to do with a tick. She just thought, again, maybe it was a really bad flu or cold, something like that. And she didn't realize how serious it was until one day she woke up and her whole side of her face was like numb and she couldn't move it. And then that's when, she went to the hospital and they diagnosed her with Lyme disease and gave her antibiotics. But they told her that I think she was on antibiotics for quite a bit, which I know that can be harmful too. That can, but I guess if it's Lyme disease or some gut issues because of antibiotics, I'll take the gut issues. You can always take probiotics or something like that to repair it. But it's, yeah. So I think she got probably pretty lucky because they told her she was like a couple days away before it was like really life threatening. But yeah, I mean, since then, my parents lived near some woods, and since then, even when they're watching, actually, my kids are there right now. I get out of work a tad early to do this, and she's watching the kids until my wife gets out. And when they're in the backyard, we're all kind of petrified that God forbid, one of the kids get a tick, and that's why your book and your research I feel like is so important because I think it is something people need to take more seriously. And it's the other really interesting thing is I guess some of the paths that doing research on this topic took you, just researching biological warfare and germ warfare. I don't know what the proper term is for it, but you found some pretty interesting stuff during your research. Would you want to get into?
Yeah, and it was.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
it was something. Yeah, in the beginning, it was like when we started the documentary. Andy Wilson is the director and the producer of it. We had heard rumors about biological warfare, but after doing our initial research for the documentary, it was pretty clear if we went down that dark alley, no one would fund us because Lyme is already pretty controversial, and none of the patient groups wanted that tinfoil hat connotation attached to the project. And of course, mainstream medicine wouldn't fund our film because it went against the conventional wisdom. So, there have been rumors around about maybe this Lyme disease was the result of an accident from Plum Island, which is right off the northern tip of Long Island, and that's where they did some biological warfare for anti-animal germs during the Cold War. So that was always there. But anyways, as we got into the documentary, we just realized, well, there's enough of a story that this is a way underdiagnosed epidemic, the tick-borne diseases, and we were there to show the patient side of the story. We did that. It took 3.5 years. It was like a year and a half of marketing, and we were all of a sudden found ourselves in the running for the Oscars. So we were on the Oscar shortlist for 2010. We didn't get on the final list. And so that was over with, and it was sort of exhausting because I was still sick while I was doing it. So I took one more round of antibiotics, and I got better after that. I got a job at Stanford as a science writer. And I said to my husband, I'm done with this project. I'm exhausted. I'll let someone else carry on this fight. But then I get this video from an indie filmmaker that I'd met along the way, and it was a confession by Willy Burgdorfer, who discovered Lyme disease. And he said, when he was investigating the outbreak of tick-borne diseases back in the 70s, that he thought that the whole outbreak, not of Lyme disease, but another organism that he would tell me about later, was a bioweapon, and he believes that's why people were getting sick. So that's sort of, I wanted to move on, but I knew I was uniquely positioned to look into it because I had been personally affected by the disease. I had sort of an engineering mind to investigate it, and I was working at a really world-class medical institution where I had infinite resources to call on. And I had done this film, so I really realized how widespread the epidemic was. It isn't just in the Northeast, it's all over. And it's just a little bit crazy that it's being ignored. So then I decided to go forward, and that launched sort of a 5-year research project on the book, where I talked to Willie before he died. He donated all his personal research papers over his 34-year career to an archive. So I went through those, and then I interviewed friends and family, and it resulted in Bitten, which showed, for the first time that the U.S. had a gigantic bug-borne weapon program. And one component of that was infecting ticks with dangerous diseases and dropping them on our enemies.
Yeah, and wasn't that I believe that was one of the tactics they in Operation Mongoose, right? Or there's some link with Cuba and this technique, right?
Yeah. So after the Bay of Pigs incident, where the CIA was launching a secret covert attack on Cuba, there were leaks all over the place, and our forces were just slaughtered. It was an embarrassment to President Kennedy and his brother. And so they created this thing called the Cuba Project, and Operation Mongoose was a subset of that. And the objective of it was that, they were super mad at Castro. They wanted him overthrown. He was a communist dictator. So they said, let's do everything we can to A, assassinate Fidel, and B, weaken his economy and make his population dissatisfied so that they'll oust him. So Operation Mongoose was a project. This one subset of Operation Mongoose was to weaken their number one cash crop, which was sugar. It's also where the U.S. got a third of their sugar, by dumping poison ticks on the Cuban sugar workers. So they did one short pilot program, and I met the CIA Black Ops guy who dumped the ticks on them.
Wow.
And it was determined a complete disaster because the way the operation was super low tech. He was just told, here's two boxes, cardboard boxes, and when the pilot goes like this, dump whatever's in the boxes out. Oh, so they were riding low under the radar over Cuban sugar fields, and the pilot went like that. He opened the door and he opened the boxes, and it was swarming with thousands of ticks. He said a bad word and then he dumped them out. But of course, when you're in a plane and you open a door, there's a lot of blowback. So what he thinks happened is one of the infected ticks got on him. He brought it home after the operation, and right after that, his infant son got super sick and almost died. So that's one of the stories in the book. So after that, he says his operations commander said, that pilot didn't work out. We're not going to do it anymore. It was too hard to control the deployment of ticks that way.
So did he know what those ticks were for and what they might have possibly had, or did he ever research it maybe after his son got sick or anything like that?
No, he's CIA working for the company, and he did so many other really bad black ops things. I mean, he's basically an assassin in Vietnam too. But he just told me he didn't know who I was. It was just a random conversation. He said that was just the strangest thing he ever did in his long career with the CIA, because it is pretty bizarre. But his son was near death in Texas, and the people in the ICU said his son was like 4 months, I think. And at 4 months, you don't have a very mature immune system. And they said, well, we don't think he's going to make it. He was in a coma. They had to intubate him, put a breathing tube in. But there happened to be a Cuban doctor who was on call, a resident, and he said, I've seen a disease like this in Cuba. I think I know what to do. And so he saved his son, who's now an adult.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you think when he said, I've seen this before in Cuba, do you think he's referring to the same disease that he actually basically, threw those boxes and brought that disease to Cuba? You think he was responsible for that?
So the tick dropper CIA guy thinks that that's what happened. But of course, many years later, it's impossible to say. And obviously, the CIA after that said, we're not going to do any more of this, at least the delivery that way. So they were admitting defeat. I mean, what they said to him is that, it's too hard to control the ticks with wind currents. I mean, because ideally you want a weapon that can be delivered precisely. And what they did later was there's these M33 munitions. So it's a bomb with a bunch of tubes in it. So they would package weaponized fleas or ticks in the bomblets. And so then the bomb could be delivered more reliably to the target, full of crawly things.
Yeah, well, they did a lot of low tech stuff. I know I mean, there's tons of just people writing about the different ways they were trying to kill Castro with like, a exploding cigar and all these silly techniques. And, so it's, Operation Northwoods, was it Northwoods? Yeah, I'm getting them all. There's so many operations that I get them confused sometimes. But yeah, they attempted tons of different ways to try to take over Cuba. And yeah, like you said, Bay of Pigs was a huge disaster. That's one of the reasons why JFK ended up firing Allen Dulles, and one of the reasons why people think he was assassinated. But yeah, it's wild. And you also found out that there's three tick-borne diseases in like the late '60s, correct? Right, which was very unusual.
Yeah. So, I mean, I we tend to like hyper focus on Lyme disease, the Lyme disease problem. And what the experts in the academic medical centers are saying is Lyme disease isn't that bad. It's usually not fatal. So, and then our tests are just for Lyme disease, the widespread tests. And so when I started looking backwards, which no one had done, uh, I realized that that initial epidemic in the late 60s, there was three like freaky new frankengerms that had never been seen in that area before. And so the first one that they were most worried about was uh, a spotted fever. So it was related, really closely related to Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And it's a very small bacterium that goes inside of cells and just jacks with all the mechanisms of your cells. And it creates, sometimes it creates a spotted rash on your extremities because it likes cool temperatures. So that was the first one. And the thing that's concerning about that is if it's really closely related to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, it can put you in a coma in 14 days. And the other thing is, I think the military had sort of a down low investigation of that because they had been actually weaponizing that for several years before people started coming down with it. What they did was they grew it in large flasks or vats with a growth medium, and then they would freeze dry the bacterium and then aerosolize it. So create a powder like anthrax powder or whatever and spray it over the enemies. So it's pretty hard to control those particles. And they thought, well, maybe it got out. So the second germ that was there was it was the second case in the U.S. of human babesiosis, which is the disease I got, so I know a lot about it, but it's a little parasite. Before 68, it was only in cows, and all of a sudden it crossed over to humans, and it would instantly kill people without spleens. So spleen is this organ that's sort of like the oil filter for your blood. It sorts your blood, it gets rid of the defective ones. And if you don't have a spleen, you can die of this parasite pretty quickly, or people who are immunocompromised, like people with AIDS. So they were worried about that too. And then on the side, there was this investigation by Yale of Lyme, what they called Lyme arthritis. So it was a cluster of people in Connecticut, and kids especially would get these huge swollen joints. They started looking at that, and because the investigation was sort of fragmented over 5 different states, nobody sort of put together all the pieces to say, isn't this unusual? Except for maybe people in the military. So that's what I started doing, is sorting through all those old documents saying, who knew what when. And when you put those together to have 3 brand new germs like that, that would have sent flags up for people, for example, in the CDC, who look for suspicious disease outbreaks. I mean, to have it in such a small area, 3 new germs that have been killing people, there was evidence that they were very concerned at that. So I dug that out.
Now, from your personal opinion, do you believe it was man-made, some of these diseases? Do you think, and do you also think that some way it end up becoming this issue with humans accidentally? Did they purposely get people sick? Was it, were they experimenting with things, and then some way, Plum Island has been documented for years. I actually have a friend of mine's wife father was a scientist that worked at Plum Island, and I'm always like messing with her, and I'm like, hey, you know what he was doing there, working on some weird animals, and obviously Lyme disease comes from Lyme, Connecticut, I believe, right? That's where it was named after. So a lot of people believe a lot of weird stuff was going on there, and possibly originated there. What do you believe? Do you think after all this research, do you have a personal opinion on if you think it was accidental, if it was even man-made in general, or could this be? Is there a possibility that it could be some freak, natural occurrence that we just don't quite understand yet?
My personal opinion, backed up by a whole lot of evidence, is that it was a series of unfortunate accidents that sparked by the bioweapons program. So my strongest bit of evidence is the oral testimony of Willy Burgdorfer, who was in his 80s when I interviewed him. He had advanced Parkinson's, but he was mentally there, and he was obviously feeling very guilty about things he had done in the 50s and 60s, because he's a celebrated NIH emeritus scientist who won all these awards for discovering Lyme disease. But he said, the thing that was spreading around Long Island, I recognized it from the things that we were working on in our bioweapons lab. So Willie admitted that he had worked for about 2 decades on the U.S. biological weapons program. He worked out of Rocky Mountain Lab, which is NIH Public Health Services Lab, but he was a contractor to Fort Detrick, which was the headquarters of our biological weapons program during the Cold War. Fort Detrick is right out about 50 miles outside of D.C. And they were sort of the masterminds of this sprawling program that was almost as big as the Manhattan Project, and as secretive as that nuke project. And they were looking at that as, well, this, if nuclear weapons aren't usable because of the blowback and the radiation, this is like a poor man's nuke, to use these insects and biological weapons. They're sort of a nice stealth weapon. They're invisible. They're hard, nearly impossible to trace. And they could dial the objectives up and down. So they had, for insect-borne weapons, they had a lethal program, where they would put some really lethal disease in ticks like tularemia. And then they had, later on, they said, well, that's, having a bunch of dead people from diseases is bad PR. There's quotes like that in some of the Pentagon documents, is let's do a chronic incapacitating version of these insect-borne weapons and aerosolized microbes that can be spread by insects. So, and the advantages to the chronic incapacitating strategy is that, you could spray it on a large population, people would be sick, they would tie up the healthcare workers, the productivity of the country would lapse, just like the objective with Cuba. And then it'll be easier for our vaccinated soldiers to go in and take over.
Yeah. That, you think about it now, with countries having nuclear capabilities, and they really do seem to fight their wars, with proxy wars and indirectly harming each other. So something like ticks would be a great way of kind of taking out your, whoever you're having issues with, but yet not sparking a nuclear war where you're going to kill everybody. And I feel like there's probably nothing the military hasn't researched or looked into at some point. You look at all the MK Ultra documents and all the crazy stuff they're doing in the 60s with LSD and whatnot. It just seems like, first of all, it seems like the 60s were some crazy times for operations and black ops stuff and all types of experiments. But do you think so? A lot of this stuff we talk about the 60s. Do you think some of this stuff is continuing? Do you think some of this stuff is still stuff we're researching and developing, or do you think that maybe it's slowed down since then?
I just I don't know. I know the Russians kept on way past the agreements to not do it. I really don't have any evidence or whistleblowers on that. But there's this thing that the experts in bioweapons talk about is dual use. So a lot of our facilities, they're saying, well, we're doing research on defense against these things that rogue nations might be working on. And so, they'll be studying these genetically modified germs. But if we ever wanted to just flip the switch, it would take just a few weeks to make them offensive. So that's sort of the ethical gray area of the thing they say is dual use. So I don't know. I mostly was spending a lot of time in the dark Cold War. So
yeah. Well, the Japanese also experimented with tons of stuff like this, right?
Right. And that's sort of the interesting part of the history is after World War II. Well, we were freaked out right around Pearl Harbor because the Japanese had these things called fugu balloons. So they released them over the Pacific, and they're these silk weather-looking balloons, and they had an incendiary explosive device on the bottoms. And they did some test runs where they released them, and they went over Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and a couple went as far as Chicago. Then they would explode and start fires, and then they had Japanese spies who would look to see how far they went. And there are some rumors that they were testing that to see if they could use that as a way to deploy plague and insects, because they had done that on the Chinese. So that sort of freaked us out. And so after World War II, our military people and the Russians all scrambled to get the best sort of biological weapons and rocket mines from the Germans and the Japanese. And so we took a lot of the biological weapons scientists from Japan and then some from Germany. Like one German scientist who worked on foot and mouth disease went to Plum Island. I don't know. And then we just took all the information on germ warfare from the Japanese, and then we sort of supersized it with our Yankee know-how. We learned how to, like the Japanese did biological weapons, but they weren't very sophisticated in their delivery. But we figured out to put them in bombs. We figured out how to mass produce the germs by the ton, in the same way that you brew beer. So that was what was astounding, is that a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I mean, it's so much. It was some crazy times. When you look at, Operation Paperclip and taking a lot of these researchers that probably should have been imprisonated, that should have been in jail. Instead, we brought them over, and they're like, hey, we're just going to continue some of the stuff the Germans did, and the rocket program, and it is pretty wild. I mean, anytime we talk about this stuff, it is hard to not, at least for myself, it's hard to not think like, okay, we're always talking about stuff that did happen. And it always makes me think like, what's going on now, that we might not, a researcher like yourself, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, will discover then and find declassified information, or actually dive deep into some of these topics and research it, and maybe there'll be people who talk, and it just seems like there's no line that governments won't cross to have, I guess, the upper hand. And to me, that's scary. It's because potentially it could lead to something very serious. And so yeah, that's always something that kind of it's always in the back of my mind, is like, well, how much of this stuff is going on still? How much has it progressed? And maybe to some very dangerous levels, and I just don't think they ever look at potential negative outcomes. It's always about like, okay, the ends justifies the means. It's all about trying to get the upper hand, or let's get this research before somebody else does. But yeah, and then from your perspective, I could just imagine having kids, you and your husband being sick for that long. How do you take care of your kids? How do you, it must have been a really hard time in your life. Because, how long were you sick? Because you did go on antibiotics, but it didn't fully cure you of all the symptoms? It took a while, because you said even when you're doing a documentary, you're still dealing with symptoms.
Yeah, I would say it took us a year to get diagnosed, and 5 to 6 years, depending on how you count it, of different cocktails of antibiotics to finally quit from getting relapsed. So the first year of treatment was really, really rough because we had such a high germ load, and when you hit those with antibiotics, all those little dead carcasses really poison your body. I mean, it feels like it's called a Herxenheimer reaction, but it feels like you have the worst hangover ever. Then, the following 4 years, I could sort of be productive. I would go on antibiotics for a few weeks, combos of them, and then I would just clear out the toxins and then just wait a month or so and hope that it was gone. But then, it would inevitably relapse. But the relapses would get farther and farther apart. And finally, what finally cured it was intravenous antibiotics, because taking orals, if you have a healthy liver, they get filtered out, and really the germs were in my head. It's Lyme disease and babesiosis really get into your head and create chronic, serious inflammation. And the human immune system doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier very effectively. So you need to get the drugs into your brain. So you need to bypass your liver. So that's finally what got me better. And I've been fine for 10 years. But I feel like we were one of the lucky ones because we got diagnosed in a year. Once the diseases progress beyond a year, it's super hard to cure.
So you don't have any lasting symptoms? Like there's nothing that seems like, I mean, my mother swears that some of the stuff that still isn't right with her is connected to her Lyme disease issue. Is that uncommon, or is that something that's possible because of the damage it does? Maybe even with the antibiotics and the damage of the Lyme disease itself.
I think when you're that sick, there is some damage, lasting damage. I feel like my immune system isn't as robust and reactive as it used to be, but it's hard to prove if that's age or the impacts of the disease.
Have you looked into, because you took antibiotics for so long, did you start taking, like, drinking kombucha and taking probiotics to kind of rebuild your health? I know that can help.
Well, if you're with an experienced Lyme specialist, that's part of your protocol. You take antibiotics, and then you work on like protecting your gut all the way along. And then when you finish the antibiotics, then it's all about restoration, detox along the way. And when I first got sick in 2002, they were just figuring it out because it was so unpopular to treat with long-term antibiotics, which is sort of ironic because if I had acne, I could be on doxycycline forever, or if I had tuberculosis, I would have to be on antibiotics for 2 years to get rid of it probably. But for some reason they decided, the experts, 2 to 4 weeks of antibiotics to cure it. But anyways, so since 2002, the Lyme specialists have been having conferences and sharing information, and science has advanced tremendously then. So there's just more strategies for treating it without, in a more intelligent way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you had a Washington Post article about your research, right? That wasn't too flattering. What was that all about?
Yeah, that was super interesting about how fake news can spread. So I write science articles for Stanford, and they just drill it into us. They, just be very accurate, don't hype, make everything based in facts. So anyways, my book was going along fine for about 3 months, and then this amazing thing happened, which Chris Smith, the representative of New Jersey, a congressman, read the book, and it really moved him. And he said, this book is amazing. Kris Newby points out how this is an emerging public health crisis. We need to deal with it. And to do that, we need to find out what experiments the government did with insects. So that's fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes. They weaponized all of them. And so he put it in the defense funding bill for 2020. And because that bill is like the largest pot of money on the planet, it became an international news story. So, but the news sort of spun it that Lyme disease was a bioweapon, which is not what the book says. The book says Lyme disease was a misdirection from the real organism that they weaponized, which are viruses and this rickettsial kind of thing. Since the news took off with Lyme disease as a bioweapon, a professor at a prestigious university pretty much said the book is bunk. Lyme couldn't possibly be a bioweapon because it's been around since Neanderthal days, and it's not a weapon. And Willy Burgdorfer never weaponized ticks. So all of those are untrue. And so then I called him and said, and that article just went viral. It went over to like 20 different places, news outlets, because they gave the article away for free. So I called him and said, well, Professor, have you actually read the book? He goes, no. So he says, I don't have time to read books. I'm a busy professor, and he teaches biosecurity. So it was just an interesting case study on how hard it is now to get the truth out. Like, I can spend 5 years researching a serious historical topic, but a professor who doesn't have time to read now reacts to a headline and it goes viral. So, it's sort of sobering, but then, I start philosophically thinking about it. And really, one reason it's so hard to believe that our government would drop ticks on innocent people is, we have this worldview that America's number one, and the Nazis are bad because they did human experimentation. But, we picked their brains and then we did it 10x on our own people, because there were accidents that I document in the book. The scientists are generally careful, but once you give a weapon concept to some black ops CIA person, they sort of don't care about public safety. They want to get the enemy. So it just ran out of control, just like you were talking about MK Ultra. So some of the tick weapons were thought up by the same people that Dietrich that did MK Ultra. So, they asked Willy Burgdorfer, hey, send us some information on tick paralysis. They would love to have a new paralytic compound to incapacitate a guard or a German Shepherd.
Yeah, well, there's a documentary on Amazon Prime about U.S. experiments, and I remember it opened up with like a story about France, this one place in France where everybody thought they were eating this bread and it was making them sick, or something like this one village, everybody got sick, and I think they found out afterwards that it was a part of some U.S. experiment where they were like putting something in the bread that was like getting people sick, and like a certain amount of people died, and it documented all these weird U.S. experiments that yeah, I mean, it shows that like the research is to them obviously much more important than any lives that are lost in the process of researching this stuff. And there's tons of evidence and proof of it. And yeah, it sucks and it's hard to believe, but I think a lot of times, like I said, like the ends justifies the means. It's for a greater good, or in this case, it might be for the greater good of the empire or whatever, imperialism is what's motivating them, whatever it may be. But empires try to stay empires, and that means do whatever it takes. The Nazis did it, and the U.S. is, I think, our current day empire, and I think it's not out of the realm of possibility they're also doing some really not so moral things to stay in power. And everything from, I mean, we've seen historically, you talked about the 60s, I mean, all the coups that were going on and all this stuff. I mean, how many innocent people died because we want to take somebody out of power that wasn't friendly to the US? It happens all the time. So it really it does, even though it's hard to talk about these things and not somebody not label you a conspiracy theorist or a tinfoil hat wearing whatever. I think when you're talking about people are much more accepting of it when we're talking about the 60s or the Cold War or Nazi Germany. Historically, it seems like, okay, we can talk about it. It's okay. But once you start getting closer to present time, it's all like, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. It's like, wait, why could it happen then, but it couldn't happen now? And I think that is a scary part of it. But yeah, I mean, your story's unbelievable. It's fascinating. It's always it to me. It's not hard to believe that it takes a personal story to motivate somebody to go this far into researching this specific topic, because usually that's what it is. You get somebody, a mother who maybe has a child that has some weird disease, and all of a sudden she's motivated by possibly GMOs or whatever it may be. And I think that sometimes it takes somebody who is actually connected and has a personal story to go to the lengths that you did to research all this stuff. So thank you for all your research. And where can people get the book? Where can people get the documentary? And I know you have a website. I know some of the stuff's on there.
So the book is sold wherever books are sold. So from the publisher HarperCollins or Amazon, and there's or Barnes and Noble. So there's a Kindle and an audio version also. And the film is available online, so you can buy it streaming for a few dollars, or you can order a DVD copy. And just look for Under Our Skin. And then the book, let me just say one more thing. The book is, I just feel like it's a cautionary tale, because if we botch this tick-borne disease epidemic so badly, it makes me feel unsafe for nefarious state actors who might want to just buy some equipment on eBay and poison us again with germ warfare. And it's easier than ever to genetically modify organisms. So, we need to learn from this mistake, this tick-borne disease epidemic, and do it quickly.
Yeah, well, I think that the problem with a lot of these type of experiments, similar to like the Manhattan Project, I mean, the scientists that were involved doing the work, they didn't necessarily want to harm anybody or use these weapons. I mean, it was, a lot of times you're just doing your research. You're a scientist, you're doing the research, and then you have people, in the military that are like, oh, we can use this for harm. We can use this for leverage. We can use this for, some type of negative thing. So I think, it's almost like the AI conversation. It's like there's people who are doing research and all this stuff, and they're not thinking about the big picture. They're not thinking about like, okay, you're contributing to this thing that could eventually be a serious issue, but you don't realize it because you're just in the process. You're just kind of going with the motions. You're part of developing the software, this technology, and you're not really stopping and thinking about like, okay, what's the big picture? Like this could eventually lead to this, and this could be bad, and I think too often people don't look at it like that. They are stuck in the motion, and they're just worried about the now. And I think we do need people who really do have these conversations about the bigger picture, like, hey, this could be dangerous, or this could be, the outcome could be very bad. So yeah, I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And right now with these gene knockout technologies like CRISPR and AI, right now our bioethics in our universities are really underfunded. So, at Stanford, we're trying to raise more money to have these bioethicists around just to advise scientists on the bigger picture. Recently there was that Chinese scientist who actually trained at Stanford and then went back to China and cloned 2 twin baby girls and who were genetically modified to supposedly resist AIDS that their father had. But, that they realized that large amounts of those girls' genomes were modified, and we have no idea like what the downstream implications of that large genetic manipulation of those 2 girls who can reproduce, is going to be. So we can't stop progress on these gene manipulations, because these gene manipulations can possibly cure cancer and fix all these really bad degenerative neurological diseases. But we need to have a plan in place and checks and balances and have small controlled studies. For example, recently there was a release of genetically modified mosquitoes in Brazil to try and control Zika. And it sounded really good on paper. Okay, let's release a bunch of males that have this gene, and when they mated with the females, they would have sterile babies, and then we could stop the proliferation of these Zika carrying mosquitoes. But guess what? They've been collecting the mosquitoes, and that mutant gene is now in huge amounts of the populations of these mosquitoes, and we have no idea what that'll mean. And if you think of our ecosystem and everything that depends on those mosquitoes, the birds and the fish and the bats, what's the downstream implications of that?
Yeah, I mean, you saw when the bees were kind of disappearing, just people started realizing how important bees were. It's something you don't even think about. You're like, oh, who cares about the bees? But it's like, wait, they're connected to all this food and all these plants, and they make the world, all these things happen, and the importance of them. I mean, anytime we mess around with nature, I know California, when they reintroduced like wolves or something like that, they're like, oh, this is a great idea. And then all of a sudden they have wolves everywhere. It's like, it's always a little scary when we kind of play God and we try. I mean, but that's the thing. Like you said, progress, right? It's like, well, we don't want to stop progress. It's like we think we're doing something good, and I mean, what is it? Is it as simple as like there is a lack of these type of conversations about like, okay, what could possibly go wrong, and maybe we should take baby steps, or is it once you discover something or you have this great plan that looks great on paper, it's just like, hey, let's just go for it, and nobody really says, hey, maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's a scientific world. It's super competitive. Everybody wants to be first to publish on a new thing. So you're right. We need checks and balances that would be built in at the sort of medical division and department level within research institutions, and more bioethicists, just like on Star Trek, you had Dina Troy, sort of the counselor there. Like when they're about to blast a whole species off a planet, she says, let's think about that. Let's think about the prime directive. What's really our goal here? So we need those kind of people around to stop and think, and they have a basis in the history of times that human hubris got in the way of, the thing that's right to do.
Yeah, well, I think profit and progress are two motivators, and sometimes things are just good the way they are. I mean, I just, I've there's a great author I like who's been on the show, Dr. Christopher Ryans, who wrote a new book who just came out called Civilized to Death: The Price of Progress, and it really debates like what is progress, because it's like we have all these material things, we have all this modern medicine, we have all this stuff, and people are more unhappy than ever. People are on more pills than ever. People are self-medicating with drugs and alcohol more than ever. So it's like we need to redefine what is progress, or at least rethink what we think progress is. And I think in the science world, it's very similar, where we just kind of continue going. We think, oh, this is progress. We're making this thing better. And we don't really think about, I mean, look at cell phones, when we created cell phones, the internet. I mean, nobody could foresee how addictive these tools could be, and also how you can use them to manipulate the way people think, the way people feel, how you can, just all these negative aspects of it. But and then I can kind of see it from the scientific perspective of like, okay, well, you can't blame the tool, right? I mean, it's you can use it for good, you can use it for bad. I mean, I'm using Skype to talk to you. I mean, obviously, internet is useful for positive in positive ways, but yeah. So I think these are interesting conversations, but I think they need to happen, and people need to have them. And I think it's really easy to just get caught up in the motions of like, oh yeah, faster internet, 5G, all this stuff, and just continue improving everything, and then sometimes only realizing later that like, oh, maybe we messed up, maybe our lives aren't better, maybe we're not more connected. I mean, social media, it's considered social media because it's supposed to be a place where we can be social and be more connected, and it actually disconnected us. More people talk via text message and social media than they do in person anymore. So yeah, I think these are interesting conversations.
Yeah, it's like the evolution of societies. It's not just our genome, but there's the evolution of rules of society that we're in turmoil now about, because the technology is advancing faster than the bumper rails.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I say that all the time. I feel like, you can read old quotes and you can read old philosophers, and like that stuff still makes sense today. I mean, people will share a quote online. You're like, oh yeah, that still makes sense today. And then it puts in perspective. That's like, wait, maybe we haven't changed that much, but our surroundings have changed much quicker than maybe we have adapted to it. So we're just, the world's changing faster than we can adapt to it, and we're still hunter gatherer, tribal people. Yeah,
Tribal.
yeah, and yet we've created a world where I can, and we're still designed to move and work our muscles and bones and all this stuff. And it's, now we live in a world where you can sit at a cubicle all day, talk to no one, have no social interactions, or at least face to face in person, take a Uber home, you get Uber Eats to get the food delivered to your house. You can literally spend all day seated and by yourself, and to some people that is their life. And I mean, I know people who have teenagers now, they're constantly talking about, like, all my kid wants to do is play video games. All my kid wants to do is be home on their phone or whatever. And so yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where just like these things are addictive, and I don't think we've realized how much they've taken over our lives. And I don't know. I mean, or am I that person who is also saying TV is going to ruin people, or the newspaper is going to ruin people? It's like when these things happen and there's this huge change in society. I'm sure there's people when everybody was on, because I think there's some meme, some side-by-side picture of like everybody looking down at their phones today, and who knows what year the other picture was from, but everybody on a train looking down at the newspaper. Like, it's just
It's a good time for pickpockets. That's what I
yeah,
say.
well, yeah, good point. Yeah. Yeah, you are right. And if you want to rob somebody, because people will tell you, hey, I'm on vacation, here's all these pictures. Nobody's at my house if you want to rob it. So it is, privacy is a thing of the past. I think people like yourself and I, who have watched the analog world transition to the digital world, we have a much better perspective of how it's affected our society, where kids who are growing up who only know a world with social media, with cell phones, to them this is the norm. Like, having no privacy is just something they've accepted, and they're going to grow up in that world, and then we're all going to die off one day, and it's just going to be the world they live in, and that's that is a little scary.
I know. I think about that every day. I mean, every day as a writer, oh my gosh, Wikipedia and Google, what amazing resources, because I can weave such great stories with all the libraries of the world at my fingertips, but it also means the bad guys can get to you easier.
Yeah, yeah. But even those things like Google and Wikipedia, I mean, that stuff, I remember when I was researching, when I first started in the podcast, I would research online certain topics I was interested in, and I could always find alternative research online. But now it's like they're kind of force feeding you mainstream perspectives. And, I did a podcast not too long ago about the censorship of Silicon Valley. And it does seem like it's an issue now where, like, if I want to get a different perspective on a story, I have to do some serious digging, where I'm not going to get maybe that smaller, website that did some great investigation or has a great perspective on a story. I'm going to get CNN, MSNBC, Fox News first, and I really have to kind of go through that. And I don't know. So it's like, even Google and the internet was this great tool, but even now it's like we're kind of now realizing that, yeah, the people who work on these algorithms and work on the software that I use every day, like, they have opinions too, and they can be influenced also, and they might also be kind of force feeding me their perspective. So that's something to be wary of also, I think.
Yeah, and to me, it was just painfully obvious when the Washington Post ran with the story about we've never weaponized ticks. It's just like, couldn't they have just called me? It would just take like 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Surprising.
And that's the issue too, because the clickbait stuff. Unfortunately, that professor who doesn't have time to read books, but luckily your book is also on audio, so he could have done that. He didn't have to read it. But unfortunately, a lot of people are like that professor. They read a title and they run with it, and they don't actually do any of their own research or look into it. He could have. I mean, even if he didn't want to read your book, you've done tons of interviews. He could have saw an interview with you, be like, oh my God, she really did her research. There is evidence of this. And he chose not to. And you can just share. I forget, there was a study about how many articles get retweeted or shared on social media and nobody ever reads the article. It's just, they're basically sharing the headline, and that's a huge issue. Yeah.
That's where podcasts are it's amazing. I never thought, about 10 years ago, someone from IAC, Barry Diller's company, came to interview my husband, and we were talking. He says, my wife says there's this thing called podcasts that are really going to be the future. And I got, oh, no way. And now it's the way that most of the millennials and the younger generation really get in-depth news. And it in a way, they don't talk to the people in the cube next door, but they feel like the podcasters are their friends, and they're there to explain in the way that humans first learned how to learn, which was with stories around the campfire.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is episode 202. I could just imagine how many hours of conversations I have on record, online forever. And people listening must feel like they know me. They must feel, because at some point I've talked about everything from my personal life, my wife, my kids. I started this podcast before I had kids, so they heard me talk, having interviews with people on talking about child development and stuff like that. So they went on this journey with me, and I also give the guests a opportunity to have a long form conversation, so they can actually get all the information out and share any story that they want, and it's not a little snippet on Fox News or MSNBC where we're going to give you 15 seconds to talk about a very complex issue or story. So I think that's one. I think we need this. We need these this platform. And when I started 6 years ago, I had plenty of people that told me what the hell's a podcast, and why would people want to hear you talk for an hour? And I'm like, I really do think it's the future. People, we are tribal, social creatures, and this is the closest thing to kind of hearing a conversation you would have with a friend or a loved one, or just a group of people hanging out, like you said, around a fire. So I think that's kind of why people are attracted to it. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And keep up the great work.
Oh, thanks very much, Ricky, and have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Kris.
I believe in the ripple effect.